Thank you everyone for joining. This is the Get Connected Report webinar from the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. I'm Dan Bowerson, Vice President of Energy and Environment Policy at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We're the organization representing the light-duty auto industry before regulators and policymakers in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about our new Get Connected Quarterly Electric Vehicle Report for the third quarter of 2024. The report includes EV sales, purchasing trends, and public charging data across all 50 states. This edition also includes an analysis of EV mandates in California and states following California's Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, or ACC2. So let's dive in. Some key highlights from the third quarter of 2024. We sold over 408,688 electric vehicles, a 0.6 percentage point market share increase over the second quarter of 2024, representing 10.6% of all light-duty vehicle sales being electrified. This was the highest quarter on record. In terms of EV model availability, also the highest on record, we had 125 different EV models sold in the third quarter of last year. Within that 125, 71 of those were pure battery electric vehicles, 51 were plug-in hybrid vehicles, and 3 of them were fuel cell electric vehicles. And one point that I want to highlight here is when you look at the segments within those 3 categories, the utility vehicles make up the largest segment between battery electric, plug-in electric vehicles. If we look back to where we were going back to the start of 2020, utility vehicles in battery electric and plug-in electric powertrains represented 19% of EVs sold. Last year, through the third quarter, those utility vehicles made up more than 70% of EV sales. So we're seeing an increase in availability of electrified utility vehicle models, and these represent crossover utilities, sports utility vehicles, and as well. When we look at the transaction price, EVs still remain higher than the industry average by over $9,000. Per data compiled by Kelley Blue Book, EV prices were higher year over year in quarter 3, but by less than 1%. The average price paid for an EV in quarter 3 was just over $57,000, which is approximately 19% compared to the industry-wide average transaction price of just over $48,000. Looking at where we've been from the start of 2020 through, again, the year-to-date third quarter of last year, 2020 EV sales represented 2.3% of all light-duty vehicle sales. In less than 5 years, we've seen that grow from 2.3% to 10% of light-duty vehicle sales being electrified through the third quarter of last year. So again, significant growth that we've seen in just under 5 years. And what does that mean for vehicles on the road? This is highlighting the number of electric vehicles that are actually in operation today. So today, there's more than 5.4 million EVs operating on U.S. roadways. That represents just under 2% of all of the light-duty vehicles on the road today. So you might think we had 10% EV sales through the third quarter of last year. Why is this number so low? We see this vehicles stay on the road typically for, on average, 12 years. So even as we're seeing increase in EV sales, it's going to take a number of years for us to have that fleet turnover and see larger numbers in terms of percentages of EVs on the road. And then when we look at market share by powertrain, we've seen year-over-year change. If we look at quarter 3 of 2023 through quarter 3 of last year, hybrid electric vehicles increased by 3.35%. Electric vehicles, just over half. We've seen a slight decline in fuel cell electric and plug-in electric sales, and a significant drop in gas and diesel. You can see the difference there between the drop in gas and diesel being made up by electric and hybrid electric vehicles. When we look at market share and go a number of years back between 2016 through third quarter of 2024, in 2016, internal combustion engine vehicles represented greater than 97% of all light-duty vehicle sales. In quarter 3 of 2024, year-to-date internal combustion engine share dropped to 77%, a 20 percentage point drop. The internal combustion engine market share, as I mentioned, was replaced by increases in shares of traditional hybrids, battery electric vehicles, and plug-in electric vehicles. Traditional hybrids, again, made up most of the alternative vehicle gains, followed by battery electric and plug-in electric. And then when we break down EV sales, which EV represents pure battery electric vehicles, plug-in electric hybrid, and fuel cell electric vehicles, going back to 2020, you've seen that white area grow, which is the plug-in electric vehicle offerings. You've seen that somewhat level off between 23 and 24. But again, vehicle manufacturers are trying to meet their customers where they are. Some customers will want plug-in electric vehicles, while others will want pure battery electric vehicles. Then when we look at market share by state, this goes back to 2021. You've seen an increase in every state, or almost every state, year over year. But one thing that I want to highlight here that's very what I would consider impressive is we have 13 states with greater than 10% EV adoption. 3 of those, California, Colorado, and Washington, are greater than 20% EV sales. On the flip side, unfortunately, we have 21 states that have not met the 5% EV market share. So we still have a long way to go for a number of the states, and this kind of shows the disparity between where some states are and where some states aren't. And then I wanted to highlight, this is a different depiction of what I previously showed, but looking at the year-over-year growth. So obviously, when you look at 2020 to 21, there was a significant year-over-year growth, 90+% year-over-year growth. Looking at 21 to 22, that shrunk to 60%, 22 to 23 down to 35, and we're seeing a bit of a leveling off from 2023 to 2024. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that. One might venture to say that the early adopters, those that were going to purchase electric vehicles, have already done so. Those early adopters may have been more willing to accept some inconveniences when it comes to available EV charging. They might have been willing to pay a premium for their electric vehicle. That's not going to be the case for the next 10 or 15% when we get there. I also might venture to say that most of that 10% probably has access to home charging, which is a huge benefit of an electric vehicle, being able to charge at home. But as we get into larger market share, we're going to have to make sure we meet customers again where they are and have charging access available to all customers. So with that, pivoting to charging infrastructure, where are we today? So what you see here is the status of charging and hydrogen refueling infrastructure through the third quarter of last year. We had 185,000 EV charging ports at almost 67,000 EV charging stations. And that's a mix of level 2, which is the charging stations that you would typically think of either at home, workplace, those areas where there's longer dwell time. The vehicle is going to be parked for a longer amount of time and they can slower charge. DC fast chargers are also included in this, and those are the chargers that you would expect along highway corridors, convenience stores, areas where customer is going to be there for a short amount of time, wants to get a charge and get back on their journey. So again, 185,000 EV charging ports. And then on the bottom right, we've broken this down by state as well and the types of chargings that's currently available. And one thing I would note, if you take this graph here and the graph on a previous slide that showed the EV adoption, you're going to notice that there's a correlation of those states that have higher EV charging availability and those states that have higher EV sales rates. So again, charging infrastructure being so critical to increased EV adoption. So our next question would be a good one, and that would be, okay, so how much charging do we need? How do we know we're short? How do we know that we're not there? The U.S. Department of Energy, through the National Renewable Energy Lab, analyzed the necessary EV charging to support 50% EV sales by 2030. And that 50% EV sales represented 33 million electric vehicles on the road. And what they found was just under 1.25 million publicly available chargers would be needed to support that percentage of EV sales. NREL also did analysis looking at what that would mean on a state-by-state basis. So taking those 33 million electric vehicles, breaking it down to how many would be in each state, and then identifying what would be necessary for level 2 and DC fast charging. So we have a state-by-state breakdown as well within that report. But when we look at what does this actually mean? So taking that 1.25 million publicly available chargers, we have 185,000 EV charging, publicly available EV charging stations today. That equates to between the third quarter of last year and the end of 2030, we would require 466 chargers to be installed every day for the next 6.25 years. Or taking that even one step further, that's 3 chargers every 10 minutes through the end of 2030 to support, again, the NREL analysis of 50% EV sales. So significant gap if we're talking about that level of EV sales. So now turning, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the spotlight for our third quarter 2024 Get Connected report was on California's Advanced Clean Cars 2 or ACC2 EV mandate. So what is this EV mandate? California, through the Clean Air Act, has the ability to request a waiver through the US EPA to allow the state to regulate vehicle emissions. The US EPA recently approved California's waiver, allowing them to regulate and implement the EV mandate. So what does this mean? So starting in model year 2026, 35% of all light-duty vehicles sold in the state of California must be electrified. Put that a different way. For every 2 gasoline vehicles that I sell, I must then sell 1 electric vehicle. That then ramps up, as you can see, getting up to 100% by 2035. Looking at that along the way, 2028, for every 1 gasoline vehicle I sell, I must sell 1 electric vehicle. Going out to 2031, for every gasoline vehicle that I sell, I must sell 3 electric vehicles. So every year you have increasing requirements for EV sales in the state of California. But California is not the only state that follows California regulations. There are 11 others that are following the ACC2 EV mandate. Those are, you can see here on the West Coast, much of the Northeast, Colorado, and New Mexico. And these 12 states represent about 30% of the US market. So 30% of the US market is following California regulations. The other 70% are following federal regulations. But not every state is implementing in the same year. So there are 6 states, California, Oregon, Washington, New York, Massachusetts, and Vermont, that are starting this program in model year 26. There are 6 other states, Colorado, New Jersey, Delaware, Rhode Island, New Mexico, and Maryland, that are starting in model year 2027. There are also 3 states that are exiting the program before the 100% mandate in 2035. Those states, Colorado, Delaware, and New Mexico, are all exiting the program in 2032, topping at an 82% EV mandate. And one thing I will note for those not as familiar with the automotive industry, the model years on the x-axis here represent model years, not calendar years. So model year 2026 vehicles can actually begin being sold January 2nd, of 2025. So there could be model year 26 vehicles being offered for sale today that need to be meeting this requirement. So again, we're talking about regulations that are very, very near term. So how do the states stack up from where they are today to where they need to be to meet the mandate? What we've done here is on the left side, we've highlighted the 2026 model year implementation states. And on the right, we've looked at the model year 2027. On this 2026 side, if you back out California, Oregon, and Washington, every state is behind 20 percentage points, more than 20 percentage points from where they are today to where they need to be to meet the mandate in model year 2026. In less than 1 model year, this is where they need to be. If you look at the right and back out Colorado, the remaining of those states are nearly all of those states are more than 30 percentage points behind where they need to be to meet the mandate in model year 27. So less than 2 model years away. So again, significant gap that we're seeing here between where we are today and where we are or where we need to be to meet the mandate. And one last thing I will highlight on this is showing industry averages, but every manufacturer has to meet these regulations. So these averages include EV only manufacturers. If you were to back those manufacturers out, where we are today drops by about half. So again, this is a manufacturer by manufacturer base and where they need to be in less than 1 model year to meet the regulations. And then looking at charging, obviously charging infrastructure, we've already mentioned in this webinar, needs to be in place for increased EV adoption. On the left side, using that same NREL analysis that I discussed previously, we looked at the number of EV charging stations, publicly available EV charging stations that would be necessary to support the mandate in model year 26 and model year 27. And what you can see is every state, almost every state, that blue bar is larger than the gray bar. If you look on the right side or the right graph here, we looked at, okay, so what percentage are we at today compared to where we need to be? And you can see nearly every state is less than half of where they need to be in terms of charging infrastructure to support the mandate for either model year 26 or 27. So again, significant gap in charging infrastructure to support what is necessary, and also significant gap in EV sales to what is necessary per the regulations. So to recap, quarter three was a big quarter for electric vehicles. We had 10.6% of light duty vehicle sales were electric, 125 models offered, both of those highest quarter on record. We've seen the number of new EV models continue to grow in all segments, but utility vehicles continues to be the largest. We have seen some slowing. ZEV sales has slowed. And why is that? I would argue that the infrastructure is not where it needs to be. EV purchase price remains higher than conventional vehicles, pricing that out for many potential buyers. And then lastly, the ZEV mandate in many Section 177 states remains a concern for states and automakers. So with that, we will share a recording of this webinar this week. All editions of Get Connected are available on our website at www.autosinnovate.org/getconnected. You can also like and follow the Alliance for Automotive Innovation on Facebook and LinkedIn, and find us on X at Autos Innovate. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a good rest of your day.